There we go. Recording has started.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure personally and as founder and chairman of the Arab International Women's Forum to welcome you today to our webinar titled Building Back Better, Fostering the Transition to a Green Economy. We are especially honored to welcome a most distinguished panel of guest speakers. Her Excellency Razan Mubarak, Managing Director, Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. Ayat Soliman, Regional Director, Sustainable Development Department, the World Bank. Barbara Rambousek, Director of Gender and Economic Inclusion at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And Dr. Noronha, Director of the Economy Division at the UN Environment Programme. We're also honored to welcome today all valued participants who have joined us from the Arab region and beyond. We have close to 200 who have registered from close to 30 countries. The duration of the session is 60 minutes. Following the introduction, I shall invite our distinguished speakers to deliver their remarks, followed by a discussion and the Q&A. I also urge you to submit your questions during the webinar. Distinguished guests, thanks to the invaluable efforts of the United Nations, and especially the United Nations Environmental Programme, the call for a green economy tops now the global policy agenda as a key strategy for sustainable development, commanding the attention of governments and the international business and global development communities. At the intersection between environment and economy, to quote the Secretary General of the UN, a green economy is an economy that not only improves human well-being and lessens inequality, but also reduces environmental risks and ecological scarcities. An economy, therefore, that is low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. With the COVID-19 pandemic, the urgency of transitioning to a green economy and a zero carbon future has amplified. As the World Bank notes, government fiscal incentive programs launched in response to COVID-19 all over the world will influence the global emission paths for decades to come. And the response to the current pandemic will, at the same time, be the response to the climate crisis. In investments today can unleash short-term gains of jobs and economic growth and deliver enormous benefits in the future, such as decarbonization, cleaner air and cleaner water, healthier oceans, and more sustainable food and agricultural systems. These investments include clean energy production, resource efficiency, investment in water infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, and improved access to sustainable energy, especially for the world's poorest. Distinguished guests, the transition to green growth is a much needed response to the many developmental and environmental crises that the world is experiencing, among them climate change, food security, water scarcity, economic instability, and deep-rooted social and economic inequalities, and the refugee crisis. For the MENA region, a green economy would boost the economy by increasing labor demand. It will also build vital foundations for economic growth, prosperity, and long-term performance in the MENA states, addressing some of the region's most salient development challenges, including food security, water scarcity, and poverty. While 60% of the MENA's population lives in urban areas, the majority of the region's poor live in rural areas. The transition to a green economy can significantly reduce poverty because strategies for green growth directly benefit poorer communities, women, children, and families. For the MENA region, where nearly 5 million jobs are at risk because of COVID-19, the transition to a green economy has exciting potential to create millions of much-needed jobs. Research shows that over 65 million jobs could be available globally in low-carbon sectors by 2030. Although the green economy is still a relatively small-scale job creator, it could have enormous potential for growth if skills gaps in STEM disciplines are addressed now, linking industry, education, technology, and innovation to ensure that STEM graduates are fully equipped with the skills that low-carbon sectors need now and in the future. In a region where, according to UNESCO, 34 to 57% of STEM graduates in the Arab countries are women, a figure much higher than that seen in universities across the US or Europe, the possibilities for women in a green MENA economy are endless. Distinguished guests, to conclude, the green economy is a call for us all to move away from the pre-COVID old normal where inequalities predominated and towards that paradigm of multinational structured cooperation that recognizes that sustainable development relies greatly on getting the economy right for everybody. Our session today will explore the transition already underway in the MENA, Africa, and internationally to create a greener, fairer, and more sustainable world, examining strategies to finance the green industrial revolution, whilst investing in our precious human capital and preserving our natural capital in a world of uncertainty and scarce financial resources. For us all here today, it's both timely and important to hear from our valued guest speakers on pathways and best practices in innovative environmental protection, the importance of fostering partnerships to drive investment and engagement in green growth initiatives, and the need to convene stakeholders around the creation of a sustainable majority green future. Distinguished guests, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you our distinguished panel of guest speakers. First, Her Excellency Razan Al-Mubarak, Managing Director of the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. For more than 20 years, Razan has played a vital role in guiding the UAE toward a more sustainable future while spearheading a progressive environmental protection and species conservation across West Asia and globally. When she was appointed Managing Director of the Environment Agency in Abu Dhabi in 2010, Razan became the youngest person to lead an Abu Dhabi government entity, one of the only women to hold such a position. Razan is also the founding director of Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund, where she's helping to build the organization into one of the world's largest philanthropic foundations, supporting direct species conservation. We also are welcoming today Ayat Soliman. Ayat is the Regional Director for the World Bank's Group Sustainable Development Department for the MENA region. Ayat has over 25 years of experience working on global issues of sustainable development at the World Bank, at the UN, and in private sector, covering water, agriculture, environment, social and urban development, as well as cross-cutting issues of climate change. Ayat currently leads on policy direction, fostering partnerships, and ensuring the integrated delivery of country and regional programs of the World Bank Sustainable Development Practice Group in the MENA. She oversees a team of over 100 staff and an active portfolio of $5.2 billion in investment across the region in urban and social development, agriculture, water, and environment sectors. We're also warmly welcoming Barbara Rambousek, who is the EBRD's Director for Gender and Economic Inclusion. Barbara's focus is creating equitable access to employment and skills, entrepreneurship, and finance, as well as key infrastructure service, reflecting the specific needs of women, youth, aging populations, migrants, and others. Barbara has 20 years leadership experience in the design and delivery of multi-sectoral inclusive development programs in Europe, the MENA, Asia, and the UK. Previously as head of regeneration and corporate strategy for the London Development Agency, She led major urban regeneration programs and the formulation of London's 20-year economic development strategy. We again welcome Dr. Ligia Noronha, who is the director of the Economy Division of the UN Environment Programme. The division works to shift economies from brown to green, with a strategic focus on decarbonizing, decoupling, and detoxifying. She leads two of the UNEP's sub-programs, resource efficiency and chemicals, waste and air quality, and the Nexus Agenda on environment, pollution, and health. Prior to joining the UN Environment, Ms. Noronha worked in the Energy and Resources Institute as Executive Director of Research Coordination and Director of the Resources, Regulations, and Global Security Division. Distinguished guests, it's an honor to welcome you all to our session today. And thank you for accepting our invitation. And it gives me great pleasure now to invite Her Excellency Razan Mubarak to deliver her address. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me, as I was experiencing some technical difficulties coming in? Wonderful, wonderful. Dearest Haifa, fellow panelists, fellow listeners, thank you very much for really inviting me to be part of this platform. Haifa, your women's platform, has always been a platform that has truly inspired me and many women, I think, along the way. So thank you for continuing to engage with us, continuing to build up these networks, and really focus on this notion of peer-to-peer capacity building, sharing, as you said, knowledge, best practice. So I'm delighted really to be here. First thing I want to do perhaps is to challenge you, Ms. Haifa, on perhaps your definition on what a green economy is. And really, this is something that has become almost my life calling, to potentially now expand the definition of what a green economy is. And I'll use perhaps this opportunity that I do have the floor to expand on this idea. And let me, start with something that's very common to now all of us, which is potentially our notion of warped time. I don't know about how you feel, but I do feel that this pandemic seems to have warped our senses and our sense of time. It does seem quite a long time ago when we first began our social distancing. And I still can remember sitting in my garden with my daughter during the first days of lockdown. And it was during spring, and it was an incredible experience. Not only because, of course, of the lockdown, of changing the way that we work and the way that we operate, but what was very different was all of a sudden I could hear the song of birds. What was very different is all of a sudden I noted the clarity in the sky. What was very different is I did feel that I was breathing better. And so, yes, indeed, the sky looked bluer, and nature seemed to come out of the shadows and present itself to us. Of course, to the delight of my daughter, who could now hear the songs and count the birds and see indeed the little bird hatchlings. The quiet from, I think, the lockdown, the pause of traffic, on one hand, I think was very peaceful, but on the other hand, it was quite eerie. But very quickly, and I'm sure Dr. Noronha would agree with me, science quickly confirmed that the atmosphere was indeed getting better. We saw massive reductions in air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions due to the lockdown. By some estimates, there were 70% reduction in levels of PM 2.5 in some of the world's largest cities, including, of course, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Delhi. By some estimates, greenhouse gas emissions will drop this year by 8%. This is the greatest percentage decrease in almost 100 years. And at the same time, I don't know if you also noticed in your cities, wildlife was appearing in the most unusual places. In Dubai, there was a beautiful picture of the Burj Al Arab building, but against an incredible backdrop of mountain gazelles. We were also seeing boars on the streets of Barcelona, jaguars on the beaches of Mexico, and more nesting turtles in India that had been seen in more than a generation. So I'm sure, like many of you, we were truly impressed by this improvement in air quality and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Because, as we all know, there's a direct connection between air quality as well as greenhouse gases with the transportation sector. So fewer cars, fewer planes meant that we saw a direct correlation with the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and indeed improved air quality. So of course, while the pain of the economic disruption felt by all of us around the world was there, it was also an eye-opener what can be achieved in such a short period of time. And Haifa, as you just said, behaviors that were once thought to be set in stone, like in-person conferences or in-person offices, were now being challenged and indeed changed. And potentially, today's norm will become tomorrow's. So what was also clear, though, and this is my challenge to this notion of improvement of environment and the difference between addressing the issues of climate change and biodiversity loss, is you did not see that concretely as you did from a climate change perspective and a change in air quality and greenhouse gas emissions as you did with respect to the numbers and the population of species, so plants and animals worldwide. And essentially, because the causes and drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss are indeed different. Climate change, as we all know, is caused by burning fossil fuels and the release of methane, while of course biodiversity loss is caused by habitat destruction, increased agriculture, fishing, hunting, poaching, and pollution. So a reduction of cars on the roads and a decrease in economic activity did do wonders to reduce harmful emissions, but almost nothing for animals and plants, which together form this web that we call nature, that together form the building block of the only planet that is habitable. And what perhaps the pandemic has also shown is our own existential link to the health of nature. I don't know if many of you have seen the latest David Attenborough documentary, but he so beautifully said that really, essentially, when nature is doing good, we do good. And by correlation or extrapolation, when nature is not doing good, we as a humanity do less well as well. And as we know, the source of this pandemic is zoonotic. And as the WHO has recently published, 70% of all infectious disease have their origins in zoonosis. So as we break away nature, as we break away these building blocks, we become, as humans, much more vulnerable to such diseases and such pandemics moving forward. And so it is very critical that we look at nature. It is very critical that we expand our definition of what a green recovery plan could include, and not just limited to addressing the issues of climate change, but rather look at the building blocks that safeguard us as humanity, and those building blocks are nature. And as I said, the numbers aren't doing so well at all. Animals or plants are continuing to go extinct at an alarming rate. By some estimates, we're losing 10,000 species to extinction every year. And this rate is 1,000 times the historical rate of extinction. Also, in my position and as the managing director of the MBZ Species Conservation Fund, we've also realized that, like many economic sectors, the conservation sector has been equally hit, if not more, by the economic downturn. NGOs, our first line of defense working on species conservation, are being hit financially, and they're not being able to do the job that they need to be doing. And more often than not, their job is not even recognized as a sector that is being hit. So as MBZ Species Conservation Fund, as a team, we started to work on a nature recovery plan to respond to the effects of the pandemic. As you all know, leaders from around the world are taking enormous financial steps to ensure economic recovery. And environmentalists are working to ensure that these recoveries are green. We see more investment in renewable energy, more investment in green technology. But however, the world also needs to expand on that definition and work on a nature recovery plan, where biodiversity and nature and those working on their protection are also given the necessary stimulus to recover. And we see that, that this is incredibly vital and incredibly important. And so I will stop there and really hear from the panelists and so that we can have an enriching discussion, Haifa, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Razan. Thank you very much for really bringing us into the subject matter of this webinar today. And thank you for your valued input. It gives me great pleasure now to invite Dr. Ayat Soliman to address us, please. Thank you, Ayat.
Thank you so much, Haifa, and it's a real pleasure to be amongst all of you distinguished panelists and in this forum. My job and my work focuses on the MENA region, and it's really a pleasure to come after Razan, who has given us this overview of the challenges that we face on the environmental side in terms of nature conservation and the assets upon which this planet is really accounting. So I will start by saying that MENA is at a crossroads. We are talking about building back better, but actually the way we're emphasizing it in our discourse since this pandemic started for MENA is to really build forward better, to take what was working in the past, but also to improve and correct what was not working. And so I'll start with a question. Is such a recovery really possible for MENA? Or are there difficult trade-offs that need to be made? But also, can there be opportunities identified that deliver both on the growth and jobs that are so needed now as part of the economic recovery from the devastating impacts of the pandemic, but also while ensuring that there is a set path for long-term sustainability, and by extension, in particular for the MENA region, sustainability we emphasize and claim are critical for peace and stability in the region. So that is the core of the work of our department. As you mentioned, Haifa, we cover the gamut of sustainable development sectors, and also as an Arab woman that has been working on these issues for many years in the region and beyond. So before the pandemic, MENA was already grappling with many of these economic and social challenges. Instability, water scarcity, high youth unemployment, polluted urban centers, to name a few. And climate change is only compounding these challenges. MENA is consistently projected to become a global hotspot for drought, aridity, and water stress. More than 50% of all land and 25% of arable land is degraded. Razan talked about the loss of species. Also, crop yields are expected to decline between 30 and 60% with temperature increases projections between 1 and 4%, depending on the scenarios you look at. And if we fail to tackle the climate crisis, and we say that we as a human species have only, frankly, 1 decade, 10 years left to do what it takes, we are likely to see many more devastating shocks in decades to come beyond this pandemic that, as Razan said, is zoonotic in nature. Oil price volatility, of course, also continues to further add to the mix of risking the hard-won development gains that this region has worked on. Now, the important aspect that we are seeing of this pandemic, moving a little bit to the people impact, is that the pandemic has affected disproportionately the poor and vulnerable, and has also led to the appearance of new vulnerable groups, what we call the new poor. Take, for example, food security. An estimated 90 million people were moderately to severely food insecure in MENA before the coronavirus pandemic. Household vulnerability in both urban and rural settings has increased as a result of the shock brought up by the pandemic, driven by falling incomes and higher food prices. In Egypt, 40 to 50% of households, for example, household incomes were spent on food before the pandemic, and in Lebanon, food price inflation, as you probably know, has been over 360%. hence the social and economic divisions that we are seeing that were already part of the instability that this region has been facing are even growing further, and people are being pushed more into poverty. And I can't stop on talking about people without focusing for a moment on the women aspect of this. Women and girls are especially hurt by the resulting economic and social fallout, and possibly, and time will tell, generationally also in terms of education and time lost. The pandemic has added to women's burden in unpaid care work and exposure to the weaknesses in the health system. But it also has made women more vulnerable to gender-based violence. And this is an area that we are also focusing on quite a lot, my team and the social team in our department. What is more, the pandemic's long-term economic repercussions are disproportionately affecting women's livelihoods, and yet at the same time, on the bright side, there are countless examples of effective women's leadership and ingenuity in the economic recovery and resilience across the world, including also in MENA, including some of our distinguished panelists today. So what we say is that this is really a once in a lifetime opportunity to rethink the development model and the economic path of MENA so that it can become more on a path that is better. And what we say, as you probably know, the World Bank has issued an approach paper to the response and recovery to the pandemic. And core to this response paper, we are focusing on making sure that the recovery delivers on 4 elements: resilience to new shocks, inclusion and leaving no one behind, sustainability for future generations, and efficiency in making the scarce fiscal and natural assets work for all. And so if you put the R, the I, the S, and the E together, it is a RISE approach: RISE, resilience, inclusion, sustainability, and efficiency. And if you look at all of these, delivering on these doesn't have to be an either or. That's what we're saying. I asked the question at the beginning: is it really about economic growth or sustainability, or can it be both? As you mentioned, Haifa, in the beginning, there are a number of countries that are putting together green stimulus package approaches and programs that are aimed to deliver a job creation and actually at multiplying jobs in the green economy, but at the same time also taking into account the needs of the recovery in the short term. And that is what we would like MENA to focus on. In particular, because in MENA, jobs are going to be needed much more going forward. About 4.9 million jobs are on the line because of the pandemic. And this is a region that will be needing 300 million new jobs over the next 30 years. And so transitioning to the green economy has the potential to provide these new jobs and actually closing the gap between MENA countries, many of which are middle-income countries, and other comparative countries around the world. The other element that is very challenging, as we know, and we need to look at it for MENA specifically, is fiscal resources, limited fiscal resources. Not all countries will have the space for stimulus packages of the size like the EU or others, but yet this presents an opportunity to tackle some of the inefficiencies in public spending, in subsidies, in losses of valuable natural resources and assets such as water, and really doing the tough reforms that have been advocated for decades, but perhaps where now is at the time and opportunity. For example, cost recovery in water services, promoting water reuse, repurposing agricultural spending, introducing digital services, and I'll talk about that and innovation because you mentioned that, Haifa, and fostering energy efficiency are all very important investments that need to happen now. So I will summarize by focusing on 3 areas where I think the RISE framework and approach is where we need to focus in the future. First is the right investments can reap triple dividends, and there are examples from across MENA region of programs such as, for example, Morocco's Green Generation Strategy on transforming the agriculture sector, the energy transformation and looking at low carbon growth. Those are investments that will deliver on jobs, but also enhance the sustainability and the inclusion. The second point is, as I mentioned, on also investments alone not being enough. We need to tackle reforms. MENA region has, and many of the countries have taken hard steps in terms of economic macro fiscal reforms. Now is the time to also do some of the structural reforms that correct biases against vulnerable groups, that protect the natural assets, that prepare for risks in the future by increasing resilience and by stopping unaffordable physical losses. Third, and that's with which I will end, is this focus on innovation and the enabling environment to spur innovation and to spur partnerships in innovation. The discussion today is one such example, but also really focusing on technology, digital development is something that can expand the horizon, particularly for young people and young women to have a significant role in the recovery and in the economic growth in the future. It is not a one-size-fits-all, and I'm happy to elaborate on that if we have time, but really the convergence of crises that is facing MENA calls for a convergence of solutions, and I really look forward to the partnerships for making this work in terms of building forward better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayat. Absolutely very sound recommendations and sound policies emanating from you at the World Bank. Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure now to invite Barbara at the EBRD to share with us her insights. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you very much. And let me start by saying how delighted I am to participate in today's discussion. The Arab International Women's Forum and Haifa in particular have been strong partners over many years. So I'm really delighted to be here. At EBRD, we invest in supporting our countries of operation to become sustainable market economies. What we mean by that is economies that are well-governed, resilient, competitive, but also very importantly, economies that are green and inclusive so that they create opportunities for all. We do this by investing in the private sector primarily. 75% of our investments go into the private sector, but then also by leveraging that engagement that we have with the private sector as a result of our investments to achieve policy reforms. So EBRD is focusing very strongly on building back better on the transition towards a green economy. And it is that nexus between green and inclusion and gender in particular that is key for our activities. We're very proud to be a leading green bank. In 2019, it was a record year for EBRD. We had investments totaling 46% of our total investment volume that went into green investments. So this is a trajectory that we intend to keep and in fact tend to increase even further to 50% and above. We combine this with a very strong focus on inclusion and gender equality. Over 10 billion euros have been already invested in projects that create access to jobs and skills for women, including those entering the labor market, also entrepreneurship and finance. For example, we have already invested 500 million euros into our flagship Women in Business program, supporting women entrepreneurs across a range of different countries. And then thirdly, to invest in quality, accessible and also affordable services and infrastructure provision. So bringing this expertise together with our focus on green is very much at the heart of what we do. Indeed, we recently had our annual meeting where our strategic priorities for the next 5 years were agreed by our governors, and the focus very much is on becoming a more green, a more equal and a more digitally focused bank. By more green, as I said, we want to invest more than 50% of our investments into green technologies, green projects. On more equal, we are due to launch a new strategy on inequality of opportunity, but also supporting gender equality specifically next year. And then digitalization is now a new cross-cutting theme that will be weaved across our investments and policy engagement. But let's look at climate change in particular. And we've heard from previous speakers quite a lot already about the challenges that climate change brings, coupled with the additional challenges that come from the COVID crisis now, creating new poor, but also leaving certain populations, and in particular women behind. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the solutions and some of the approaches that we are taking at EBRD in order to counteract these trends and these challenges that are emerging. So if we look specifically at green investments, we look there at women in order to enable them to reap the benefits from a green economy transition, both in terms of their employment as energy professionals, but also in terms of entrepreneurs who can adopt and invest in green technologies, and finally as users of different services. So what are we doing in the MENA region in particular? EBRD is investing in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Tunisia, and now also in Lebanon and West Bank, Gaza. And we have very strong ambitions there in relation to building back better, particularly with a focus on green. There are 3 areas that I want to pick out in particular. First, we promote women's employment in the green sector, particularly in relation to green jobs and green skills. For instance, we have programs in Egypt focused on the renewable energy sector, where we support clients to actually enhance the number of women who gain qualifications in STEM-related subjects, and then very importantly, to support them from the transition of their education into careers in that sector. We know that a lot of women drop off at this point, and that this is a very complex and difficult transition. And we actually work with our employers to establish partnerships with schools, with universities, to ease that transition and really create opportunities for women to remain in the sector and start careers. In Egypt, we also are the financier and partnered with the Egyptian authorities on one of the largest solar panel parks in the country and globally. It's the Benban Solar Park in Aswan, which is one of our landmark projects there. And we have leveraged that partnership with the Egyptian authorities, but also with private sector clients to specifically integrate a focus on green skills and employment opportunities for women in the renewable energy sector in this context. We have similar programs also in Kazakhstan and elsewhere, so we are drawing a lot on best practice and expertise between our policy partners, but also our clients to enhance what we do across our region in this context. A second area that we focus on is women's entrepreneurship, basically to enhance women's uptake of low carbon technologies and promoting access to green finance and entrepreneurship for women. We do that across a range of different countries in the MENA region. It's specifically Egypt and Morocco. So how do we do that? We actually work with partner financial institutions to help them establish products that target lending to SMEs for green technologies. And we then at the same time work with women entrepreneurs to build their capacity to understand how green technologies can enhance their businesses, what the value added is, and how they can actually invest in those, seek finance, seek the capacity building, the advisory services in order to help them choose the right technologies for them to grow their businesses or sometimes even start up businesses. And then the third area is we actually look at gender responsive design and infrastructure projects. And here I have 2 examples. One is our flagship Green Cities program. So we work with city authorities and also public and private sector partners in those cities in order to develop Green Cities action plans that really look at holistically at how cities are run, how they are operated, and how green technologies and green ways of managing cities can be brought in, where capacity can be built, and very importantly, how gender can be fully integrated into these measures. We launched these programs in 2016, and we now have 43 cities across all of our regions partnering with us in this context, and have already invested 1.5 billion euros spanning 21 countries. So in Egypt specifically, we are working with Alexandria, with Cairo, and then in Jordan also with Amman. So specifically, what are we doing at the Green Cities level? We look at access to transport and infrastructure, safe access to particularly transport for women. We look at green cities, green jobs, and green skills, and how those are being opened up for women as part of the city management, but also different parts of both the public and the private sector. We look at urban and green design and make sure that women but also other groups who tend to be left out of these consultation exercises are part and fully integrated into shaping urban and green design solutions. We are also looking at leadership and decision making to make sure that women are part of the decisions that are or can shape the decisions that are being taken at the city level. And then finally, in relation to water and agriculture, for example, in Morocco, we have the Sais and Garret basins, where we promote both environmentally sustainable, but also inclusive opportunities. There we work with women farmers to help them access economic opportunities in commercial agriculture in the face of a changing climate in the Sais basin. But also, very importantly, we work with the Ministry for Agriculture to develop a strategy that specifically focuses on how to support women across the value chains and across the different parts of agriculture to help them take up opportunities in the sector, adapt and enhance stewardship of resources, but also be able to capture entrepreneurship opportunities, have the skills and access to finance to do so. Across all these areas, we work very closely with the Green Climate Fund and the Green Investment Fund. So partnerships are very, very important for us in this context. Now, we know that, and we've heard a lot from the previous speakers, that the pandemic has, of course, sharpened the challenges that we all face, and particularly that women face across the region. Their jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to the effects of the pandemic. They bear the brunt of the care and unpaid work that is required. They are more likely to reduce their hours and drop out of the labour market altogether as a result of the pandemic. And they also find it harder to access formal finance and advisory, as well as actually informal finance and advisory. We know that remittance flows, for example, have decreased substantially as a result of the crisis, having a huge impact on informal access to finance for women. At EBRD, we have developed a solidarity package that is 21 billion euros across this year and next year. And in this context, we have really strengthened our focus on gender to ensure that we provide a gender and inclusive support to our countries of operation and also to our clients. So we have increased our focus on inclusive and gender sensitive infrastructure. Our women in business programs have gone online. We provide a lot of online mentoring, advisory services in a digital format. We have created a knowledge academy for women entrepreneurs that is entirely digital and provided also in a range of different languages. And then we are working also with our policy partners, for example, with the Ministry of Tourism in Jordan, where we have helped them create digitally based health and safety training in order for staff, particularly in the hospitality and tourism sector, to undergo that training to facilitate the reopening of the sector and the safe operation of the sector as and where this is possible. Overall, we really try to make sure that across our green portfolio and across the green investments that we have in the region, that gender is fully mainstreamed and that we have a strong focus on opening up access to economic opportunity across a wide range of areas for women in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you very much for sharing with us again the multifaceted and intensive work, actually, also of the EBRD in the region and in other countries in the world. Last but not least, it gives me great pleasure to invite Dr. Noronha to share with us the United Nations Environment Department input. Thank you, Dr. Noronha.
Thank you very much, Haifa. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm really delighted to be here this evening, and more so because I heard such exciting presentations that I've decided I'm going to put away all of my prepared remarks, and I'm just going to try and not answer, but engage in a conversation because it really stimulated me to engage in some of that, starting with Razan and her whole question on the green economy. Absolutely right. And your observations on COVID. COVID indeed parted the curtains, and we saw another possibility. We saw what could be done. We saw that if people behaved in certain ways, if things were in certain ways, we could have a number of the objectives that we're looking for. But the key to all of this, even though the COVID opened the curtains, it also showed us the social upheaval that it's caused and the economic disruption. And we cannot avoid that because we're living in a world where there are such huge disparities and huge inequities, whether it's MENA or anywhere else. And I'm not going to address, although I have a lot of comments on MENA, but you've covered MENA so well that I'm not going to go into MENA, but just speak more generally. That we have a situation where the vulnerable have become much more vulnerable, and women indeed are amongst the most vulnerable of all. I am in India at the moment because our Nairobi office is closed, and I've been witnessing the migrants going home during the COVID crisis, and you cannot imagine what an absolutely heart-rending situation that was, and the need to reimagine a different future. if we want to really look out for each other. And that is why I think as women, and thank you very much, Haifa, for leading this movement, because I think it's so important that women come together on such issues. We need to work towards a planet which is fit for current and future generations, which is what Razan's been saying. You know, so how do we look at this planet which is both fit for both these generations? How do we bring in the idea of responsibility and widen the moral circle, widen and broaden it? Because at the end of the day, we must care not only for ourselves, but care for those around us, but care for the future people. And so if care and this idea of duty of care comes in, and women are natural proponents, we must think of the future very differently from what we've been thinking in the past. And in this context, and colleagues have already spoken to energy transitions, the green transition, etc. Key to that is a just transition. It's absolutely important that we see who is being affected by the changes that we're introducing and respond to that. Not only because of the politics of it, and the politics will stop the transitions from happening, and we see that all the time, but also because it's morally right to be concerned with the other. And it's in this context that even in our own new midterm strategy, which is being discussed in the United Nations Environmental Programme, which is ably led by our new executive director, whom many of you know, Inga Anderson, the focus is really on three crises: climate change, nature, and chemicals and pollution. Very clearly, let's focus on the three crises. Let's get actions on these three. And fundamentally, what is leading to these crises is unsustainable consumption and production. So you can talk of population, you can talk of technologies, but really it's a focus. The key is the way we consume and produce, because the way we consume and produce is creating many of these impacts that we talk about. Now, when you look at consumption and production, again, women have a huge role to play here. Why? Because as consumers, and you will see that a lot of the developing world looks for more consumption. Absolutely. There is overconsumption and there's underconsumption. And in UNEP, I lead the work on sustainable consumption and production, and I'm deeply embedded in this and happy to talk to you for hours on this one. But just to say that one of the key aspects of consumption is not just overconsumption, but also underconsumption. And this underconsumption is very much connected with underconsumption of aspirational goods. Everyone has aspirations, but how do we address these aspirational goods? By making them more sustainable, so we can have a consumption which is through a sustainability lens. And again, we can get into a conversation. Unfortunately, there's very little time, so I cannot go into that. But one important aspect of all this, apart from the consumption and production, because many of you, and especially in MENA, there's a new revived interest in mining and extractives because it's creating new financing in a post-COVID situation. But there's also, amongst the mining companies, a lot of concern with environmental, social, and governance issues. We must ride that wave. We must demand more of that, because that can create a completely different way of mining, a different way of doing extractives, which can result in more responsible production here in the States. My last point, Haifa, and I'm going to stop just because of lack of time, is the issue of rural transformations. And I know Haifa is very involved in this, but one of the key things that came out of COVID was the importance of investing in rural areas, because a lot of the migrants have gone back to rural areas. And this has created pressure on ecosystems, whether it's in Africa or whether it's in India, whether it's in in MENA. You know, you have a situation where ecosystem resilience is being affected because the workers have gone back to rural areas. It doesn't mean that we need to stop that. We need to find ways into which we have a green transformation in rural areas, ways in which we can support the development of jobs and opportunities, which build on ecosystem services and goods, but enable people to live where they are in a much more productive and happier way. So I'm going to stop there only for lack of time. I can go on with this conversation for very long. And one of the key aspects of our work is to align finance. And I know that Ayat mentioned that, and so did Barbara, aligning finance with the real economy. And so this is a really important way, because we can change behavior of companies, we can change the behavior of consumers. We have to change the behavior of finance, because finance, if it's aligned with the real economy change that we want to do, it can move mountains. And so I will stop there, but thank you so very much for giving me this opportunity to talk today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Noronha. I know you have to leave shortly, but what I decided to do, because we started a few minutes late, I'm not going to go to the questions I have prepared for the speakers. I'm going to go back to each and every speaker and ask you to add to anything that you wish to further add to your earlier remarks, in case there's something that you wish to elaborate on, having heard everybody. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Noronha, because I know you have to leave. Is there anything else you wish to add to your to what you have kindly shared with us now? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think women need to be central to the green transition. I repeat that. I said it before, I'm saying it now. I am saying it because not just in the usual economic terms that we say that, you know, women have so much to contribute in terms of economic power and economic potential. I think women have a different way of seeing and a different way of feeling responsible. And I do believe responsibility needs to come in a big way. Whatever we do, we can have enormous plans for the future. But if that idea of care and responsibility is not uppermost, we will not be delivering on this. In the context of our work in the new midterm strategy, just to finish that thought that I had, we are focusing a lot on science too. So all of our work is based on the science, but the science needs to be connected with the governance, and the governance needs to be connected with the finance and economic transformations. And we're bringing, as the others have, digital transformations to kind of connect the dots, because we believe that digital technology can both scale up the work that we are doing in a much bigger and better way than we are doing, but it can also substitute for a lot that we're doing. What we're doing now is substituting for travel. Otherwise, I would be in London talking to you, and I didn't have to do it. So there is both substitution and a complementarity in digital technologies that we can develop a lot. And all of this speaks well to women, because we can be more multifunctional. We can be at home and we can do all of these things better as we go forward. I'll stop there, and thank you very much for having me, Haifa.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Noronha. Thank you very much. I would like to go to Ayat, perhaps for something you wish to add, Ayat, to your earlier remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And really, I think the way that this has been inspiring to me also has caused me to shift. I could have given you a little bit more information about the work and programs we do, but I do invite everybody, including all the audience, to connect with us on the programs that so that we can continue to do things together. But what I really want to perhaps say as a last word is that the voice of women is critical in this conversation and in the forward look on what it takes for especially the MENA countries. I think, you know, we all spoke about the evidence, about the data, about the partnerships, about the finance, about the investments, and the governance structures and institutions. What we really need is to touch the hearts and the minds of the people so that they can continue to demand sustainability. They can continue to demand that we protect the assets upon which we rely, that we safeguard for future generations, that we are inclusive of those that don't have a voice. And that is something that we can do as women. I think I fully agree with what Ligia just said. We need to have that voice, and I think we have a lot of excellent women leaders across the region. It is an honor to see some of you today. And the partnership that we have and the conversations we have are one of those important steps in the way.
May I invite Razan, please, now to share with us any other thoughts that you would like to add, Razan, to your earlier remarks.
Thank you very much, Haifa. And it's been such a delight to hear Dr. Noronha, Ayat, and Barbara. Really, thank you. I suppose for me, the sort of, you know, my concluding remarks, which is again comes from an inspiration of what all you ladies have also spoken about, is that we use this opportunity not just as a pause, but a true reset. And we use this opportunity to look at how we can create jobs to address the problems and the challenges that we're facing. And again, my big statement and plea there is not only look at the issues of climate change, because if we address the issues of climate change, they will not resolve the issues of biodiversity loss. And biodiversity loss and addressing biodiversity loss is a job creator. restoring the incredible ecosystems of the MENA region, whether it's the marshlands in Iraq or the cedars of Lebanon or the watersheds in Jordan. Those are real areas where we can actually create jobs. And guess what? Not only jobs, but also a sense of purpose. People want jobs, but they also want a sense of purpose, and women obviously as well. So really, thank you very much, Haifa. Those are sort of my last remarks, but mainly a plea to consider a much wider description or definition of what a green economy could entail. Thank you.
Barbara, may I invite you, please, to share with us your remarks?
Thank you very much. And I really have to say it was a very, very inspiring conversation and discussion. And thank you to all the other speakers for their really inspiring thoughts in this context. I just wanted to, in a way, conclude by really summarizing that as with all crises, this crisis is not gender neutral. You know, we have a combination of so many different crises coming together. We've got the climate change crisis and the economic crisis in a way that comes from that, the huge transformation in labor markets, but also in terms of what skills will be needed and how the economy works and how you can participate in the economy in this context. But then also overlap that with the COVID crisis and the myriad of new challenges that women in particular face in this context. And in a way also this expectation to go back to much more traditional norms and for the women to stay at home and take on the care work and to fall back into areas where we thought we'd come out of, you know. So I think there is a real need to in a way, Build Back Better says it, but to not just go back to the old normal, but to actually see how can we do better than what we did about a year ago? How can we preserve the gains we have made on gender equality over the past decades, but really avoid a backdialing? And how can we work together on this? I think we all bring different areas of expertise, be that in terms of financing or policy, or a particular focus on thematic areas. And it is that the joint work and the cooperation and the understanding in a way of also how we can each contribute our part of the jigsaw to make this picture whole that really lies at the bottom of a solution. So I hope that today's event will have brought us a step closer to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I wish to first thank all our distinguished speakers. Really, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. My concluding comments, allow me to say a couple of points. Number one, I am really, really heartened and encouraged to learn of all the programs in depth that the World Bank is undertaking, that the EBRD is undertaking, that the United Nations also environment program is undertaking. And of course, being in the UAE during this COVID period, I am following all the time the outstanding policies that the UAE government also is following towards sustainability. So I'm really heartened to learn of all these programs and to learn from all the distinguished speakers in depth about what are the programs that you are initiating on the ground to effect change and to impact people's lives. Number two, of course, I value the focus on women and the role of women and the importance of the role of women in achieving any economic, social, political development in the region further. And I will add our youth, women and our youth. Our human resource is our richest resource, and that a lot has to be invested in that. And to ensure that our women, our youth are at the heart of all the policies, of all the measures that are being undertaken by all the governments and all the international development organizations to get us out of this crisis, and importantly, to address the issues that we had before and that now have got accentuated. So investing in our human capital, women and youth in the region, is a key priority. And both of them, actually, we find many cases where women are already we know that women are the backbone of the agricultural sector, obviously all over the world, but there are many more women and youth now are getting, excited about smart agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and our youth also. And we need to encourage them and support them. And many of them want to do social enterprises, which is really giving them business, productive business, but also impacting change on the ground. So I think we need to encourage them in that endeavor. And many of them, and most of them, are keen, definitely, on a green economy and a green future. So thank you all very much again. And it's a pleasure to welcome you today. And we remain in contact to pursue further collaboration in achieving all the objectives that we all care about. Thank you again. Thank you, Ayat. Thank you, Razan. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.